Harley-Davidson Sportster motorcycles have combined raw bone styling with quick, nimble performance and a do-anything versatility since 1957. Over those 47 years, the Sportster has slowly evolved, adding only those elements which are true to its character. The Sportster mission remains as clear today as it was in the beginning. From a distance, the 2004 models retain their classic heritage, but they have been totally re-engineered for the 2004 model year. All new frames featuring a new rubber mount isolation system, lower seat heights, and improved ergonomics. A new rugged 883 or 1200cc Evolution engine, and a long list of component changes from new brake calipers, wider rear tires, reduced diameter handlebars, and a larger fuel tank capacity. In this program, we'll take you on a tour of the major chassis changes on the Sportster. Later in the program, we'll cover the basic service procedures for the new Sportsters from PDI through the higher mileage intervals. We'll also demonstrate the procedure for removing the engine from the frame. Subsequent PhD programs will focus on the new Sportster powertrain to familiarize you with the changes. Let's get started with a look at the all-new frame. While the frame retains its narrow double down tube design, the new frame now accommodates both the driver and passenger foot peg mounts. Due to this redesign, the rear brake linkage and master cylinder have been repositioned. The master cylinder now mounts transversely across the rear of the frame. A bell crank is attached to the mounting plate to transfer the motion from the brake pedal. There is no adjustment on the rear brake rod. All Sportster models feature new brake calipers on both the front and the rear. To replace the rear pads, first push the caliper body in to move the piston into the caliper body to gain clearance for the new pads. This will push fluid back into the brake reservoir. You may have to remove some fluid to allow for this. Begin the procedure by removing the plug covering the pad pin. Next, loosen but do not remove the pad pin. Removing the pin may cause difficulty and additional work during assembly because the pad spring plate may move out of alignment. Pull the pin out until the inner pad drops free of the pin. Slide the old pad out and install a new pad. Check that the mounting tab is seated in the slot in the caliper bracket. Because the pads are held by the caliper pin on one end and the caliper bracket on the other, do not remove the caliper from the bracket when replacing the pads. Doing so makes the job more difficult. To replace the outboard pad, hold the inside pad in position by hand while pulling the pin out to free the pad. Remove the pad and install the new pad while continuing to hold the assembly. Make sure that the tab on the pad is seated in the slot in the mounting bracket. The pin should be inspected for signs of wear, such as grooving. The specifications for the pin are in the service manual. Always support the pads to prevent the pad spring or pads from shifting. A 1/8 inch drill bit can be substituted to hold the pads. Finish the job by torquing the pin and pin plug and testing the brakes and fluid levels. The front calipers use a similar pad retention design. The pads are different from the rears, however. The replacement procedure is the same. Push the calipers in to retract the pistons. Do not pull the pad pin out without supporting the pads. Remove and replace the inside pad first. Check that the tabs on the pad are seated in the mounting bracket. Hold the inside pad while replacing the outside pad to prevent the spring or pad from moving out of alignment. Always inspect the fluid levels and brake light operation as well as the lever feel after replacing the pads. Another new feature of the Sportster frame is the investment cast steering head section with the integrated fork lock. The steering head bearings used on the new Sportsters are similar in design to the dyno models. The grease zerk found on previous model years have been removed. The lower bearing races are a slip fit over the stem and use improved dust shields for protection. Service intervals for the bearings are unchanged, with a fall-away inspection at 1,000 miles and 10,000 miles, and lubrication scheduled at 10,000 miles. Another change in this area is the solid mounting of the handlebars. The rubber isolators are no longer needed, and a new smaller diameter handlebars provide a solid and responsive feel to the steering without tiring vibration. Now let's focus on the new rubber mounting system. The engine cases have front and rear mounting flanges cast into them. The front mount consists of two composite isolators, which index to the bore in the engine case. The mount support on the left side of the frame is removed to provide clearance during engine removal. The rear mount also uses two composite isolators and a removable support on the left side of the frame. The swing arm pivot shaft supports the engine in the mounts and established the horizontal position of the powertrain at the rear. Three non-adjustable stabilizer links position and control the powertrain movement. No alignment adjustments are needed. The swing arm now mounts to the powertrain rather than to the frame. The right side isolator is removed to expose the pivot shaft. Spherical type bearings, similar to those used on Softail models, are now used. There is no scheduled maintenance or lubrication required until 30,000 miles. The two swing arm mounting bolts thread into the pivot shaft and can be removed without disturbing the engine mounting. In addition to these major structural changes, the new Sportster frame also repositions the oil tank and battery for improved ergonomics. The oil tank is a molded component. The capacity has been increased to approximately 4 quarts. The tank is now positioned further under the seat area, and a cover is used to reduce the contact between the rider's leg and the tank. A unique feature of this new tank design is the flush mount dipstick system. To remove the dipstick, push the dipstick down and release. It will pop up, allowing you to turn it 1/4 turn counterclockwise. Turning the assembly may be difficult when the seal is new or there is an oil film on the chrome cap. Do not pry on the cover, as it can be damaged. Use a clean cloth to clean the oil film and provide additional friction when needed. The oil level can be checked with either hot or cold temperatures. To check the level, the bike must be resting on the jiffy stand, and the dipstick must be fully inserted to measure the level. When the oil is cold, the correct level should be approximately at the midpoint between the upper and lower mark. If the level is below the lower mark, only add enough oil to raise the level to the midpoint. The final oil level should be checked when the engine is at operating temperature. When the engine is at normal operating temperatures, the level should be up to the upper mark. Do not overfill the oil tank. With warm oil, it will take 1 quart to raise the level from the lower mark to the upper mark. The oil tank drain hose on the new Sportsters is attached to a removable frame clip on the left lower frame rail by a worm drive clamp. The procedure for changing the engine oil is the same as previous Sportster models, including the step of partially filling the new filter with oil prior to assembly. This minimizes the time needed to build full oil pressure on initial startup after the oil change. While we're looking at lubrication service, let's touch on the transmission lubricant procedures. As with the engine oil, the transmission fluid should be at normal operating temperature. Drain the lubricant into a suitable container using the drain bolt on the left side. Allow sufficient time for the lubricant to move from the transmission cavity to the primary drain port location. To refill, you must remove the inspection cover. On models with mid-set foot pegs, you will need to remove the footrest support. Add the replacement lubricant. Allow sufficient time for the lubricant to flow into the transmission cavity. Use caution and do not overfill. Add lubricant until the level is up to the bottom of the diaphragm spring. The primary chain tension procedure and specifications for the new engine are the same as previous models. Remember that the initial tension specification used by Harley-Davidson during manufacturing is 1/4 to 3/8 inch. This specification is set using specialized equipment. If the chain is found to have less than 1/4 inch free play at any time, it should be adjusted to the field service specifications of 3/8 to 1/2 inch. Inspection should be done with a cold engine after rotating the engine to find the tightest point. Remember that the first step when working on the primary drive is to disconnect the negative battery cable to prevent accidental startup. Next, let's take a closer look at the battery. In addition to repositioning the oil tank, the battery mounting was also changed to move it out of the way of the rider. To access the battery, first pull out on the top corners of the side cover. Then lift up to free the cover from the lower tab. The maxi fuse connector is attached to the battery strap. To remove it, slide it to the rear. The bike is shipped with a fuse removed. During the pre-delivery inspection, the battery voltage is tested and then the fuse is installed. Open circuit battery voltage must be above 12.6 volts or the battery should be charged. To remove the battery, first disconnect the negative battery cable at the stud on the top of the crankcases behind the starter motor. The negative cable must be removed with the battery. Now the hold-down strap is removed. The positive cable is disconnected at the battery, and the battery is slid out of the tray. To install the battery, first connect the negative cable to the battery. The cable should be positioned with the cable routed straight down as shown here. Slide the battery into the tray. The negative cable is routed so that it is positioned on the right side of the frame down tube. Position it to avoid contact with ground until the positive cable is attached. Connect the positive cable and protective cover. Finally, connect and tighten the negative cable. To install the cover, first engage the lower tab, then slide the top of the cover into the upper clips. The oil tank cover is removed differently. The dipstick is removed first. Use a screwdriver to free the lower tab and then lift the cover off the two top pins. The seat on the new Sportster has a unique mounting system. Seat removal should be demonstrated to the customer at the time of sale to prevent potential damage. To remove the seat, first remove the single rear fastener. A large post stud on the frame engages with a keyhole bracket on the seat. To release the seat, push the seat forward and then lift it to detach the post and plate. The seat can then be slid rearward to free the tongue from the frame in the front of the seat. To install the seat, first position the front tongue on the frame slot and then lower the seat. The post must fit through the hole in the seat plate. With the post in position, slide the seat back to align the fastener with the fender hole. This concludes our brief overview of the Sportster chassis and some of the select service procedures. In this section of the program, we will be demonstrating the major steps involved in the removal and installation of the engine. To aid you in servicing the engine, flowcharts have been added to the engine section of the manual to provide you with quick references to the procedures and manual sections containing the needed information. In preparation to remove the engine, the following components and procedures need to be performed. Remove the seat and the left side cover. Remove the battery and drain the oil and transmission lubricants. Disconnect the outboard oil line from the tank. Do not attempt to remove the vent line. Prying on the hose will cause the tank fitting to crack. It is removed later. Next, the exhaust system is removed, followed by the right side foot pegs and controls. With the controls removed, the sprocket cover is removed. If the sprocket is to be removed for servicing the transmission main drive gear, use the holding tool and lock nut wrench to remove the nut at this time. Remove the P-clamp at the swing arm and upper mounting bolt securing the brake line. Remove the exhaust interconnect. Then loosen the rear axle and push the wheel forward to remove the drive belt. The feed and return lines from the oil tank can be disconnected, but not the vent hose. The fuel tank is now drained and removed. With the fuel tank removed, the 11 electrical connections listed in the manual are disconnected. Disconnect the clutch cable from the handlebar lever. Remove the ignition coil and bracket. Disconnect the 5 connectors listed in the manual. Continue by disconnecting the horn and harness bracket from the frame tube. The enricher knob is disconnected and the bracket removed. Remove the air cleaner cover and filter. Remove the backing plate and move the wire harness, clearing the area between the engine and the backbone of the frame. The carburetor can now be removed and secured. Use care when removing and installing the carburetor to avoid scratching the valve cover. The rear stabilizer is removed from the crankcase along with the ground strap. A spacer is used on the engine side of the link. Remove the bolt attaching the upper stabilizer link to the engine bracket. Next, remove the 2 bolts attaching the bracket to the frame. The bracket is removed with the stabilizer attached to it. The lower link and bracket are also removed from the frame. With the stabilizers removed, the left side footrest and shift lever can be removed. The rear footrests are also removed on the Custom and R models. The rear master cylinder reservoir must be relocated. Pull the decorative cover off to uncover the mounting bolt. Remove the bolt and secure the reservoir, keeping it upright at all times to avoid introducing air into the system. Unbolt the rear brake light switch. Also remove the wire harness from its mounting points along the lower frame rail on the right side. To protect the engine and frame surfaces, apply gaffer's tape or other low adhesive strength tape to areas that may contact the frame during removal. Loosen but do not remove the 2 front isolator mounting bracket bolts. Loosen but do not remove the 2 rear isolator mounting bracket bolts. The engine is removed using a hoist to support the engine. The bike is moved off the lift and placed on the shop dolly with the assistance of the fat jack. Position the fat jack from the right side of the bike. Slide the jack in until it meets the jiffy stand support and covers half of the rear crossmember as shown here. Lower the jack and secure the frame to the stand using a strap. Slide the rear wheel forward and tighten the rear axle to hold the wheel. Attach the engine hook special tool to the cylinder heads. Using an engine hoist, carefully lift the engine only enough to remove the pressure on the front and rear mounts. Remove the front mount through bolt, mounting plate, and isolators. Support the rear wheel with the fat jack and remove the 2 swing arm mounting bolts. Then pull the swing arm back until it clears the frame. Now you have the needed clearance and angle to remove the vent line from the oil tank without damaging the tank fitting. Remove the 2 bolts and the rear mount bracket on the right side and the ground cable from the top of the primary. With an assistant, slowly raise the engine as needed and swing the rear of the engine out from the chassis, followed by the front. The engine will need to be raised until the valve covers reach the frame so that the wiring harness must be moved completely out of the way. Use the special engine stand and cradle during the engine disassembly and service. Installing the engine begins by installing the pivot shaft into the engine case and securing the pivot lock plate. This lock plate keeps the pivot shaft tube from rotating during the torquing of the swing arm mounting bolts. Position the right rear and front isolators. Do not insert the left side isolators at this time. Swing the front of the engine into the chassis from the left side. Check the routing of the wiring at the rear of the engine. Check that the nubs on the right side rear mount are positioned in the frame opening. Install the left side rear mount on the pivot shaft, followed by the mounting plate. Start the 2 retaining bolts, but do not tighten them. Raise or lower the engine until the right side mount aligns with the frame hole. Install the left side isolator followed by the mounting plate and start the 2 mounting bolts, but do not tighten them. Slide the main front mount bolt through the left side and start the nut, but do not tighten. Next, torque the front and rear mounting brackets to the specified torque. Using a new hose clamp, attach the vent line to the oil tank and position the remaining lines and wire harness at the rear of the engine. Position the swing arm and install and torque the 2 mounting bolts. With the rear mount complete, torque the front mount bolt to specification. The hoist can now be unhooked from the engine. The chassis can now be removed from the shop dolly and returned to the lift for the final assembly. With the mounts in place, assembly continues with the rear stabilizer, with the spacer and ground strap. The lower front stabilizer and mount is assembled next, followed by the upper link. Refer to the service manual for torque specifications. Refer to the installation instructions and procedures listed in the service manual and complete the installation of the engine into the chassis. Perform a test ride to check for proper operation of all systems. After the ride, inspect for fluid leaks and check lubricant levels. This concludes this introductory program on the 2004 XL Sportster. As with any model, specifications and procedures are subject to change in future model years. Always refer to the service information for the model and year that you are working on.